Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Welcome, everybody, to Driving the Line. This is Mike Bohan alongside Kenny Ray and Jim Seibert, and it is a fantastic day. We're glad to be sharing it with you as always. And I just want to tell our listeners, as every time we do a podcast, we're recording these podcasts, we get together, we talk about who's listening to our podcast. And we just want to tell you all how much we appreciate you, how much we enjoy hearing your feedback, and the conversations that we have that are generated from the information that we're sharing, we truly do enjoy. So it's just pretty cool. And we just want to thank you all for that. And thank you for joining us once again. Well, gentlemen, we have some interesting information to share today. But as we're moving along throughout this year, fall is quickly approaching us. And even though it doesn't feel like it for most of us right now, it's coming, and winter's just right around the corner. And, you know, I looked up the average September temps for Dallas, for Tulsa, and for Kansas City. Those are just kind of the closest cities that near Jim and Kenny and I. So the average high temps for September in those cities are 89 in Dallas, 85 in Tulsa, and 80 in Kansas City. Those are the average high temps for September. Now, those, to me, don't feel much like fall. But in some of the states right now that our great truck drivers are traveling in, tire chain laws have already gone into effect. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to take a look at why we have these laws, these tire chain laws, why they might already be in effect in some states, and kind of the ins and outs of what you need to know regarding these tire chain laws. Well, the why is the chain laws are in effect because they're going to help commercial motor vehicles navigate those steep grades found in the mountainous states. And without the chains, when there's bad weather, vehicles can become disabled. They can cause traffic delays. They can even sometimes close the roads down, which is never a good thing, especially on our interstate systems. And every state is going to have their own laws regarding tire chains. Some states have very, very basic laws that say something like, well, chains are allowed for safety due to snow or ice or slick conditions, things like that. And Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma are all states that have those types of laws. They don't get real specific. And then there are states that have very, very specific guidelines, including things like the definition of a commercial motor vehicle, the beginning and ending dates of when chains must be carried on the vehicle. Or possibly the dates of when they're prohibited from being used in the state, when they've got to be applied to the tires, and what geographic locations the chains must be used in. That'd be, for example, mile marker A to mile marker B. That's the location that chains would have to be used if there's a winter event. And then also what the penalties are for not complying with the laws within the state that you're traveling. Now, I want to make something clear before we get too far into this. When states have dates, for example, Colorado is September 1 through May 31, where chains have to be carried on the vehicle from mile marker 133 to 259 on I-70 west of Denver. This doesn't mean that the chains have to be on the tires all the time from September 1 through May 31 in that area. They just need to be carried on this commercial motor vehicle. And then if there is a winter weather event that requires chains, they'll be notified by the state, and then the change then will be applied in accordance with the state laws of Colorado for that particular example. Now, if you look at the states that have some of the toughest laws, you're going to notice they've got a couple of things in common. The first being elevation. A couple of years ago, FreightWaves published an article outlining the 5 states with the toughest tire chain laws. And the states that they listed in their article were Colorado, Nevada, California, Washington, and Oregon. And all of these states have large mountain ranges running through them. You've got the Sierra Nevada and the mountains in California. You've got the Cascade Range running from Northern California up to Oregon and Washington. And then you got the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. So with that elevation comes something else. You've got lower temperatures, possibility for winter storms and slick conditions, which makes chaining up a necessity in those areas and during specific times of the year. And it was a couple of years ago, I was out in Denver for some training. Kenny, you were actually out there at that same training. We spent a few days out with our friends from NATME doing some train the trainer courses. And one evening when I was out there, I decided to go hike a trail that my oldest son had told me about. Now, this was the end of July. And when I left the hotel I was staying at, it was 90 plus degrees. And by the time I had reached the trailhead for my hike, I was at roughly 11,200 feet. I was up there a ways. And the temperature was, I want to say it was in the upper 50s, low 60s. So starting out in the Mile High City at 5,280 feet, gaining an additional 5,920 feet, I lost 30 plus degrees. And again, this was in July. It was nowhere near fall or winter. So to kind of put that in perspective on our interstate system, and we'll keep with using Colorado as an example, the Eisenhower Tunnel on I-70 west of Denver is at 11,155 feet, which just happens to be the highest point in the interstate system, by the way. So it's not going to have the same weather that Denver has. And heading out west from Denver, you also have some of the steepest grades on the interstate system as well, anywhere from 5 to 7%. Now, I'm telling you, if you're not used to driving these types of roads or driving through the mountains like me, being from Missouri, it will give you a white knuckle ride when the roads are clear and dry and the weather's perfect. It's something that you really have to get used to. And you really got to take your time when you're not used to it and you're just traveling through, maybe you're on vacation or something like that. These roads are steep, and during the winter months, they can get treacherous if there's inclement weather. So if you add snow to those roads, and then you add being a commercial motor vehicle that weighs 80,000 pounds, the roads can be very dangerous. Hence the chain laws that we're talking about today. So if winter weather hits, those chains that the states are requiring us to put on our commercial motor vehicles provide that added traction and hopefully safer operation for our commercial motor vehicles. And chaining up, we want to make this clear because every state handles this, but chaining up is not just a suggestion when you're going through these mountainous states. It's not hey, it's a good idea if you put chains on during the winters when there's snow on the ground. These states are going to have laws, and they're going to enforce those laws. And some of those laws, violating them, comes with some penalties. And Kenny, I know you and I have talked about some of the penalties that go along with this. I don't know if you've got some info you want to share on that, but I know every state's a little different, so it's kind of tough to wade through the differences from state to state.
You know, Mike, and boy, what a great intro you did there on why we have these laws and the necessity of them and the importance of them. And I know that all three of us are from states, and we live in states that don't have that mountainous terrain. The two of you have lived farther north than I have, and y'all at least experience, snow and ice normally on an annual basis. This whole concept's just foreign to us in the South. I'm in Texas, lived in Texas my whole life, and most of my clients, most of the trucking companies that I serve are in Texas. But this is important, even for those of us in the southern states, because our trucks run to those states. And every year I will have one of the safety directors from one of our clients that'll call and say, hey, my truck just got stopped at the port of entry in Colorado. There's no snow on the ground. We just got popped for not having snow chains. What's up with that? And we go into this whole dialogue about these various laws. And there's two things you said that I want to repeat, and then I do want to share with you just a couple of representative examples of what the consequences can be for this. First of all, these snow chain laws are not part of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation. They are state specific. And because of that, the trucking companies are just going to have to do some research and find out, if I run certain states, what are my requirements for those states in terms of snow chain laws. And the websites are very explanatory. The states all do a really good job of telling the motor carriers what it is they have to have. But I was amazed just looking at, and I only picked three states I picked. to look at. I was amazed at how the states even changed the definition of what a commercial motor vehicle is in relationship to their chain laws, their snow chain laws. For instance, in Colorado, they say it's anything over 16,001 pounds. And you mentioned it's specific mileposts. They say Interstate 70 from milepost 133 to milepost 259. And then they even tell which tires or how many tires on the tractor or the trailer that's got to have chains. For instance, Colorado says you got to have chains on 4 of the drive tires. You get to Oregon's law, and they have diagrams showing you which axles it has to be on, both on the tractor and the trailer. Oregon's law says it's anything over 10,000 pounds, and it's required as needed. Colorado, you mentioned, is mandatory, September 1 to May 31st. Utah defines it anything over 12,000 pounds, again, as needed, and it's got to be on at least 4 of the drive tires on the tractor. And, here we are, guys, in September in the South, or for me in Texas, we're in September, and it's still hot. I'm just going to tell y'all, it's still hot. Our summer's not over in Texas, and yet Colorado's already enforcing their snow chain law. So what happens if a trucking company goes up there to any of these states and don't have them? Well, for Colorado, if you just simply don't have the chains when they're required, it's a $579 fine. I don't know how many sets of snow chains you can buy for $579. I've never bought them and never installed them. I don't even know that I've ever seen a set of snow chains, but I'm betting with $579 you can buy a bunch of them. Now, if during the snow season, you get stopped or you impede traffic and you're blocking the roadway in Colorado, even if you haven't created a crash, but you simply can't get up a grade because you don't have snow chains with you and don't have them installed, that fine jumps to $1,157. So we're talking about a fine of over $1,000. Plus, if you have to have a tow truck come out there, and a big truck wrecker, an 18-wheeler wrecker, to get you moving, there's no telling what that cost would be for you. Utah, the fine for not having snow chains in Utah, $1,000. They just make it easy. It's $1,000. And in Oregon, it's $880. So, everything from $880 in Oregon for not having snow chains when you need them, all the way up to $1,157 Colorado if you end up blocking the roadway because you can't get up a grade. The consequences for not having these snow chains is consequential. I mean, it's severe from a financial standpoint. So I'm going to yield to you and Jim to talk more about the technicalities of the thing. But the last thing I want to say, and again, what a super job you did on the intro, is it's state specific. So go to the state you run in, and it's simple. Just get on whatever search engine you use on the internet. And for instance, just type in Colorado snow chain law, and it'll immediately take you to their website. And the website is very, very explanatory. And I think for companies, particularly Southern trucking companies that I deal with the most, your best practice is simply plan for the most restrictive state you run through. And for most of us, the most restrictive state's going to be Colorado. If you can meet Colorado snow chain law, you're probably going to be in compliance, with one exception, because I did mention that some of the states, they mandate what tires and what axles you got to have on. When I look at those diagrams from Oregon, I'm not sure having 4 sets of chains are going to be enough for Oregon, because their diagrams show them both on the drive axles on the tractor and on opposing sides on the trailer. So again, just look at the websites of whatever state you run through, and they'll tell you exactly what you have. But for all the trucking companies in the South, just know that we're in snow chain season, and if you don't have them on the trucks, the fines are pretty serious.
Yeah, it's weird to be thinking about snow chains when, like you said, Kenny, it's still summer. Down where you're at, it's still summer. We're still hanging on to summer here, but it's something that, as you put very well, just because you may be located in the South, or maybe you're out in the East, or maybe you're from Missouri, wherever, but we're delivering freight anywhere in the country. You're going to be running through some states that these laws have already gone into effect. Like I said, Colorado is already going to be enforcing those laws. you've got the chains on the vehicle somewhere with them, because if you get stopped at this point through May 31st and you don't have them on the truck somewhere, even if there's no snow on the ground, they're going to hit you with one of those fines Kenny was talking about there. So a couple of things that we've talked about coming into this podcast is, okay, so we know we've got states that have laws. We know we have some specifics that we need to know about from the specific states. And Kenny hit it right on the nose. If you're going to be traveling through certain states, you need to go to their websites, figure out what their laws are, that kind of thing. But how do we prep for this? I mean, how do we know for sure that our drivers know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, that kind of thing? And Jim, jump in here with anything you've got on prepping our folks for this, the types of chains or devices that we can use on the trucks, because that's going to be an important part of the process, is not just knowing what the laws are, but then getting our folks prepared for the laws in the states they're running through.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Listening to you guys talk, so you mentioned I reside in Oklahoma now, but if I haven't mentioned it before, I'm a flatland kid from south central Nebraska, right in the Platte River Valley, where row crops stretch for miles. And any of our listeners that have ever driven from the eastern part of the state to the western part of the state of Nebraska, into Colorado, Wyoming, will attest that miles and miles and miles of corn can lull everybody to sleep. Growing up in Nebraska and living through those winters and seeing the 18-wheelers up and down I-80 with the chains hanging from the rack headed towards the rack on the undercarriage, always headed towards the western mountainous states. Chains in Nebraska and Iowa, when you add 1.5 inches of snow followed by 40-mile-an-hour winds on an interstate, it gets a little hairy in a hurry. And so chains are not a foreign concept or something that I haven't seen. But you described the white knuckle, and I can say that I have grown up driving those interstates with a white knuckle, fighting wind and fighting, some whiteout scenarios. And many states have just gotten to a point where they'll shut the interstate down, just flat put the blocks on so that people can't even get out there. And let's not even worry about the chains. Let's keep things from happening, because a recovery mission is almost just as hazardous as whatever the driver might be facing out on the road. So I thought your examples there were pretty excellent, and they brought back, kind of gave me a little bit of a cold sweat thinking back to some situations I found myself in. The training for installing these tire devices, it's imperative. You can find yourself at the right mile marker. You can push the limits, and then you're there. You haven't even ran into stuff, but you fall into the time frame. And it's not always perfect weather and really comfortable for you to be out doing that. So you want to be efficient with it. Simple research on the Google provided me so many videos of different chain attachments, different types of alternatives to chains, and best practices. They're out there. The information is there. Many of us take part in a lot of different training and practice things with our companies, those truck rodeos, making a chain install or these alternatives, doing an install, setting, the time periods or, safe installment, things of that nature. There's a lot of programs and I'm a repetition guy myself. I learn a lot by the hands-on approach. These guys are mechanical. They're professionals in their industry. So have that practice. You can take any of these programs offline and make it your program. And so I encourage you to look that up. And Kenny, you were talking about specific state laws, and Mike, you might be mentioning this a little bit later. there's also a lot of good references for folks that cross the United States with many different that cover all the states and their chain laws. You can find those on many different websites. TheTrucker.com was one of the best that I saw when I was looking at, well, what's it look like as we go from the East Coast to the West Coast? And that website paints a pretty good picture for requirements for those for chain laws and things of that nature. I think we'd be a little bit remiss if we didn't talk about some alternatives to chains. And there's a few out there that are pretty successful. And let's keep some things in mind as we talk about why would we do alternatives to chains? Well, price could be a factor. Kenny, you brought that up. Well, how many chains do I need to have with me? What's the price of them? How many chains could I buy for one of these citations? How much weight does the average set of chains? And so when I say a set of chains, I'm referring to 2 sets of chains or 1 set. So 2, 1 for a tire on each side. So 2 sets is going to be, you have 4 chains for 2 drive tires. So when I'm sharing some prices here, it's for a pair. It's for 2 chains. AutoSox. AutoSox is pretty unique alternative to chains, and some of the benefits of switching to something that's a fabric material. They cover more of the tire. They're typically lighter, slim fit, a lot smoother, but you get a lot more surface area, and you're getting this system that is going to be a fraction of the weight of a set of tires. It's a tough as nail fabric. And like I said, when you cover the full tread and the width of that tire, it increases your traction versus having some bare spots and some chains. So those are about $260 is what I was able to find online. Another popular product is something called FlexTrack Snow Claws. And that's a rubber strap that wraps around and is going to ratchet through your wheel. And the perks is you can install those without having to move your rig. So there's a benefit there. They're a lot lighter than snow chains as well, and typically easier to put on and take off, saving time and a lot of energy. They cover 50 to 60% more of a tire than chains or cables will. And those are about $250 for a pair. And then another one is some truck claws. So that's just, you kind of got a single cleat that you're going through your wheel on. Those are about $150 a piece. So the price of those can jump up as you're trying to fit more around your tire. The applicability of truck claws is typically, I'm in a tight spot. I need some serious traction to get moved out of this spot. There's other things that are out there when you're taking weight and space savings considerations in. Hey, look them up, do a little bit of research. There's things that are there that you can put in your kit when you're planning to travel through some of these states. Chains versus these different applications here. $134 was about the cheapest set of chains that I could buy versus $300 for double. So $134 for a single chain, $300 for 2 chains in the package. And those were the cheapest that I could find across some of these. So there's just a few thoughts for the listeners' consideration there, Mike. What else you got? Anything on any alternatives?
As we're looking through, and just like Kenny had mentioned, as we're looking from state, these are state laws that we're dealing with. So depending on which state you're running through, there are alternatives out there. The alternatives that Jim mentioned, I'd look some of that stuff up, check with the states you're running in to see if they are allowed, to see if they allow those alternative types of devices to be used instead of chains, because state to state is different. We can't just assume that each state is going to allow like an AutoSock or tire spinners or tire sanders. I know that's stuff that Colorado had mentioned on their website, and even the Colorado Highway Patrol had mentioned some of that in some of their material. But as Kenny mentioned, these states all have their own laws and their own their own guidance. So check with the state you're running in before you just assume that you're going to be okay using an alternative for sure. But there can be some benefits out there if they are allowed. So it's definitely worth looking at. One of the things that I wanted to, and you guys jump in with anything you've got on this, but one of the things that we all are big on is being prepared, whether it's a trucking company preparing their drivers, whether it's us training drive, whatever it is, we want folks to be trained. We want them to have good information. And this is one of those areas that is going to be very important that you incorporate into your training program as a trucking company. As if you are driving through any state that's got a chain law, especially these states out west that we've talked about, the Colorados, Oregon, Washington, out in the Northwest. If you're operating out there, it's going to be important that you make sure that if you hire a driver or if you are a driver, that you know how to put those chains on, not just that what the law is in the states that you're running in, but that you know how to put those chains on. And as Jim said, you know how to do it with some efficiency. So you're not laying on the side of the road in snow and ice trying to put these chains on. So I would recommend if you are a trucking company out there listening to this podcast and you do an orientation, you're bringing drivers in, have that be part of your orientation class. If you know you're going to be traveling in those states, physically get drivers out in the yard, show them how to put the chains on, and then have them put the chains on, have them demonstrate they understand what's going on and they can do it, and they can do it right, that they've got them on there the way they're supposed to be. I think that would be something that would be extremely beneficial. And also in that recurrent training program that you have, if you do training every quarter or once a year, this would be something you might hit on every year. Bring the drivers in, do a refresher training, set a truck up out in the yard and make sure that we're going through that and putting the chains on and showing each driver how to do that. Because there's a lot to it. I mean, if you've seen it done, we're all a little bit, I would say, behind the eight ball a little bit based on where we're at, that our states don't have those laws, but all of the trucks that are running west are going to go through some of those mountainous states. So it's going to be important that the drivers are trained on that. And I've seen videos of companies set those training sessions up like that. I think it would work really well, but there's a lot to it. It's not just how to put it on, it's how to look at the chains themselves. We've done a podcast on talking about load securement during some of the CVSA's checks that they do. Well, on load securement, sometimes chains, the links get bent, things like that. Well, it's the same thing with the chains you put on the tires. You would want the drivers to inspect those chains to make sure that they're in good condition before they throw them on a tire to take off on a trip in one of those areas that chains are required. The proper way to put them on to make sure they're secured, having the equipment that you need, the bungees, the straps, everything like that to make sure that they're tight on the tire. That's all something that you don't want to just assume someone knows. And it's not just common sense to say, well, just put the chains on the tires. It's something that takes some understanding, takes a little skill. So I think that would be beneficial. And I don't know, honestly, I'm trying to think of some trucking companies that I work with that if they have that in their training program. I don't know, Kenny, do you know of anybody that's doing that in their orientation or their recurrent training, talking about snow chain?
Not as a matter of course they don't, because it's kind of like what we're talking. The reason we're doing this podcast, a lot of times, the first time it dawns on one of these Southern trucking companies, and this happens every year. I don't know why they don't put something on their Outlook calendar, but one of them will call me and say, hey, my guy is sitting at the scales in Colorado and just got popped for not having snow chains. Refresh my memory. What is that? And then, Mike, the point about the training is, good and well, they didn't even realize it was snow chain season. So, they haven't done any training. It just hadn't been done. And one of the purposes of our podcast, because all three of us are passionate about the trucking industry. We love it. We love what we do. And one of the whole purposes behind this podcast is help to refresh the memory periodically of the owners of trucking companies, the safety directors of trucking companies, of these milestones that come along every year that, just to remind them, hey, guys, it's snow chain season. And part of what you're talking about right now is not just realizing, well, we got to have them on the truck and it's that time of year, but do my guys know how to put them on? Do my drivers know how to do it? And you and Jim both hit the nail on the head. I can't imagine laying on the side of the highway when there is snow and ice and the wind's blowing 40 miles an hour and your fingers are froze and you're trying to put something on a tire and you don't even know how it works. You have no idea. So right now, again, while in the South, we're in September and it's still hot. Get a truck and a trailer out there on the yard and teach your guys how to do that. That's the way. But no, I don't know anybody that's doing it as a matter of course, as a standard operating part of their training program.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things in the industry that where we take some assumptions on what folks know, what their knowledge is of the industry and their job as a truck driver and what their skill set is. But this is one of those, as you said, we're just kind of bringing this to your attention because down in your neck of the woods, Kenny, it's tough to think about snow season when it's 95 degrees out and it's
brother,
blistering hot. I mean, it's just tough to think about that. But as we said at the beginning of the podcast, there are already chain laws in effect right now in this country out west in the mountainous states. So it's something you need to think about depending on the geographic location that you're running in. Check your states, make sure that you know the laws in the individual states that you're running in. As Jim mentioned, there's some alternatives out there, but check into that stuff. What's cost effective to you? Where those alternatives may be allowed. And for me, if you don't get anything else out of this, just knowing that these laws are in effect and making sure that your folks are trained on how to put those chains on and when they're required to do it, I think is a huge, huge, huge thing that I think a lot of folks are overlooking because it's something that the last thing you want is a driver to be stranded out west somewhere because they didn't have the chains with them because they didn't know about the law. So anything else, guys, that we want to mention on this? Because as I said, I hate to even think about it, but we are heading into the winter months and these situations where chains are required are going to be happening very soon. So I think we've covered a lot of information here, but anything else you want to share with the listeners?
No, great job. Just remind them, go to those state-specific websites, and I was amazed how explanatory and user-friendly the state websites are on these snow chain laws.
Yeah, and as Jim mentioned, we'll put a link somewhere where we can show you. There's some good websites out there that have all the states, like links to all the states and what the chain laws are, and you just click on the state and it'll take you to their website. So it kind of compiles that into one resource, and it's beneficial. That way you're not just typing in each state. But make sure that you're when you are looking at for those individual laws that you are on the state's website. That I always hate taking kind of secondhand information, or if you read something in an article, that's good. But if you really want what the law is, go to Colorado's website, go to Missouri's website, go to Oregon's website, whatever. Look at that state's laws and see what it says for yourself so you get an exact information. Jim, anything else for the listeners?
No, I think we hit the repetition and the practice part. There is no substitute for training, and there's no substitute for planning. So recognize it. If that's a part of your routes and it is, now's a great time to get a head start on it. And if you haven't started by now, you might be a little bit behind, but go ahead and start anyways and get prepared. It was a good podcast today discussing a lot of different tools for the toolbox on getting prepared.
Well, Jim, Kenny, thank you as always for your expertise. You guys are the best. I also wanted to take just a minute, something we haven't done, but I'm gonna do it today. And I want to thank Aaron Hawkins and Amanda Graff. These are two very important people who are always behind the scenes, making sure that everything's taken care of for this podcast. These two never want any attention, but they deserve some serious accolades. Ladies, we could not do this podcast without you. You are greatly appreciated. Thanks for what you do. And so for all of us here at Driving the Line, thank you to our listeners. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.